You're standing on a wooden deck, 60 feet long, and it's moving under you like something alive. Salt in your beard. Wool soaked through. A single square sail cracking above your head. You look left. Water. You look right. Water. You look behind you, at the place land should be. Water. No compass in your hand. No map in your chest. No little blue dot telling you where you are. Just gray sky. Gray sea. And a wall of black cloud rolling in from the north, swallowing the horizon you were steering toward 10 minutes ago. So how did they know where they were going? How did they not get lost forever? Because getting lost out here isn't an inconvenience. It's a sentence. You're carrying barrels of fresh water, maybe enough for a few weeks. Dried fish, skyer. Once that's gone, there's no refill in the middle of the North Atlantic. Rain, if you're lucky. Nothing, if you're not. There's no cabin. You sleep on the boards, under a wool blanket, over water cold enough to kill a person in under an hour. And the ocean you're crossing, Norway to Iceland, Iceland to Greenland, is roughly 1,500 kilometers of open water at its widest stretch. Weeks at sea, no landmarks, no coastline to hug. Now here's what that actually looked like when it went wrong. According to the saga of the Greenlanders, around the year 986, a merchant named Bjarni Herjólfsson sailed from Iceland heading for Greenland to find his father. Then the wind died and the fog came down. The saga says they drifted for days, no idea which direction they were pointed. When the fog finally lifted, Bjarni saw land, but it was wrong. Forested, low hills, no glaciers, nothing like the Greenland he'd been told about. He'd been blown so far off course he was looking at North America, roughly 500 years before Columbus, and he refused to land, turned the ship around, sailed back on a guess, and reached Greenland anyway. Now, this comes from a saga written down about 2 centuries after it supposedly happened. Historians treat it as a story with a probable historical core, not a verified logbook. But it tells you something real about the fear. Even the good navigators knew the ocean could take the wheel out of your hands. And here's the part that should be impossible. They had no magnetic compass. The compass doesn't show up in European records until around the late 1100s. That's a century or more after Bjarni's voyage. No sextant. That's the 1730s. 700 years too late. No sea charts. No lighthouses. No clock accurate enough to be worth carrying. Right now, the device in your pocket is talking to satellites 20,000 kilometers above your head, fixing your position to within a few meters while you walk to a coffee shop you've been to 9 times. They had wood, wool, iron, and their own eyes. By every modern standard, they should have been lost forever, but they weren't. They found Iceland. They found Greenland. They found the edge of a continent nobody in Europe knew existed. And then they came back. So what were they actually doing out there? Start with the strangest one. Old Norse texts mention something called a solar stein, a sunstone. The clearest description comes from a 13th or 14th century Icelandic tale, where a king holds a stone up against a completely overcast, snowing sky and finds where the sun is by watching how light radiates through it. Modern researchers think that could work. Some crystals, calcite, cordierite, tourmaline, split or filter light depending on its polarization. And on an overcast day, the sky is still polarized in a pattern that points back at the hidden sun. Turn the crystal until the brightness evens out, and you have a bearing. But be careful here. This is a hypothesis, not a settled fact. No sunstone has ever been recovered from a confirmed Viking Age site. One piece of Iceland spar was found in a shipwreck off Alderney from 1592, centuries after the Vikings, and a team at the University of Rennes argued it could have worked as an optical compass. Other researchers have tried to replicate the technique and struggled to get a reliable reading. So plausible, physically real, and genuinely debated. Not proven. In 1948, a Danish archaeologist named Christian Webeck was excavating a Norse site in Uunartoq fjord in southern Greenland, the ruins of a Benedictine convent. He found a broken piece of a wooden disc, about 7 centimeters across, a hole in the middle, triangular notches cut around the edge. A Danish mariner, Carl Solver, proposed it was a sun compass. Stick a pin in the center, watch the shadow, and the carved lines tell you when you've drifted off your line. Some scholars find that convincing. Others don't. They've argued the notches don't line up well enough and suggested it could be something else entirely, from a household object to a decorative disc. Later researchers proposed it might have worked as a twilight board, usable even after sunset. The honest version is, it's one broken fragment and the interpretation is still argued over. Next, latitude sailing. This is the backbone, and it's the least mystical thing on the list. You don't try to find a destination. You find its latitude, and then you refuse to leave it. Measure the sun's height at midday, or the North Star's height at night. Against your hand, a notched stick, the mast. Sail west. Keep that number the same. Sooner or later, the land you want walks into you. And the Norse wrote these routes down. Medieval Icelandic sailing directions describe the run from Norway west to Greenland like this. Keep far enough north of Shetland that you can only just see it in clear weather, and far enough south of the Faroes that the sea appears halfway up the mountain slopes. That's not folklore. That's a bearing, written as a picture, and when instruments failed, the ocean itself was the instrument. Seabirds. Most species only range so far from a nesting cliff, see one, and land is within its flight radius. Follow it home at dusk. Clouds. Land heats differently than water, so a stationary cloud stack sitting in one spot while everything else moves is often sitting on top of an island. Over ice, the sky reflects a pale glare sailors later called ice blink. Water. Color, temperature, the taste of it near a glacial outflow. Driftwood. Seaweed torn off a coast. Whales. Feeding grounds sit in predictable places, and experienced crews knew which ones. And then there's the famous one. According to the Icelandic Book of Settlements, a 9th century Norwegian named Flóki Vilgerdarson carried 3 ravens with him. Release one. It circles and flies back the way you came. Land is behind you. Release the second. It comes back to the ship. No land in range. Release the third. It flies straight ahead and doesn't return. You follow it. He did, and he reached Iceland, and he's the one who named it. That story is a legend recorded generations later, but the underlying principle, a land bird will not stay over open water, is just true, which brings us to the part that's easy to miss. We think of sagas as entertainment, stories about feuds and ships and dead men. But listen to what's inside them, sailing durations, which coast has which kind of cliff, where the fog sits, what the current does south of the Faroes, who got wrecked and where and why. In a culture without charts, the story was the chart. You memorized it. You recited it. You handed it to your son before he ever touched a steering oar. So what was the actual technology? It wasn't the crystal. We're not even sure that existed. It wasn't the disc. That's one broken piece of wood with an argument attached to it. It was the fact that none of these people were navigating alone. Every crossing that went wrong became information. Bjarni's disaster wasn't just survived, it was told, repeated, corrected. 15 years later, Leif Erikson used that story to go find the land Bjarni had refused to land on. Every man blown off course who made it home came back carrying a new piece of the map. How many days, what the water looked like, where the birds were. And that piece got added to a system no single person could hold in their head. A helmsman standing on that deck in the year 1000 wasn't relying on his own skill. He was standing inside 200 years of other people's mistakes. Grandfathers who drowned so the route could be corrected. Uncles who miscounted days so someone else wouldn't. They didn't have satellites. They had each other, across time. So, how did they know where they were going? They didn't. Not the way you do. Not to the meter, not to the minute. They knew the sun's height at noon. They knew which cloud was sitting on land. They knew the bird overhead had a nest somewhere, and that somewhere was close. They didn't need to know exactly where they were going. They just needed to never stop reading the world around them. And that was enough.